When you wake up at 73, the first thing you feel is your joints. It doesn't matter what the weather is like outside or what the plans are for the day. First, I need to gingerly move my legs to check on my new hip joint implanted 3 years ago. Then I stretch my fingers, dispelling the morning stiffness, and only then can I think about anything else. My name is Miriam Holdsworth. I've lived in Ellendale all my adult life, taught math at the community college for 38 years, and now enjoy retirement in the house my late husband Walter and I bought back in the 70s. The house isn't luxurious, but it's spacious and comfortable. 4 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a fireplace, a large kitchen, and a backyard with apple trees that Walter planted when we first moved in. Today is Tuesday again, which means I have a game of bridge waiting for me with my old friends Helen, Prudence, and Vivian. This has been a tradition for 15 years now, since we all retired at almost the same time. We take turns meeting in our homes, drinking tea, discussing books, local gossip, and complaining about sore feet. But most importantly, we play bridge. I love this game for the fact that it gets my brain working. At my age, it's essential. I always have the same breakfast: oatmeal, toast with jam, and a cup of strong tea. Walter used to joke that you could tell your watch by my breakfast. He died 6 years ago of a heart attack. Suddenly, just like he wanted. "I don't want to be a burden, Mary," he often said. His wish came true, though I would never consider him a burden. After breakfast, I go to check the mail as usual. Fred, the letter carrier, always comes at 8:30, and I'm used to finding mail in the box by 9. But today, it's empty. That's odd. Maybe Fred's sick or something's happened. I'm just about to go back inside when I hear a familiar voice. "Mommy." "Hi, my daughter Rosalind," or Rose as she prefers to be called, waves to me as she stands at the gate with a stack of envelopes. "I picked up your mail. There were some bills in there, and I thought I'd help you sort them out." Rose walks toward me, elegant even at 9 in the morning, wearing an impeccable beige suit and heeled shoes. Her blonde hair is gathered into a neat bun, her makeup flawless. My daughter always looks like she just stepped off the cover of a business magazine. "Thank you, but I'm perfectly capable of handling my own bills," I say, reaching out for the mail. "Of course, Mom," she smiles, but takes her time handing over the envelopes. "I just thought I could help. You know you can always count on Elton and me." There's something about her tone that makes me uneasy. This is the third time in the last month that she's accidentally shown up at my house early in the morning, and each time she finds some excuse to stop by. "You never came this early, not even when you lived in Ellendale," I said. "Now that you've moved downtown, suddenly you're an early bird?" "I have a meeting with a client not far from here." Rose shrugs. "I thought I'd stop by and see you before work. Is that weird?" "Yeah, it is weird. My daughter is a corporate lawyer, and her office is in the downtown business district, 20 minutes from here. What kind of client would be in our quiet suburb at 9 o'clock in the morning?" "Come in for a cup of tea," I invite, deciding to take a closer look at her. Rose follows me into the house, looking around as if she's seeing it for the first time. "Mom, have you thought about moving? This house is too big for you alone. And the stairs. It's hard for you to climb with your hip." "My hip is perfectly fine," I cut off, pouring the tea. "And I love this house. My memories live here. Memories you can take with you," she insists. "And the house. It's just a building. Elton and I found a great apartment in a care home. It has all the amenities, medical staff around the clock." "I don't need medical staff," I interrupt her. "And I'm not going anywhere." Rose sighs like I'm a stubborn child. "Mom, you're getting older. Elton and I are worried about you. You live alone, and if anything happens, nothing's going to happen to me." I set the cup on the table with such force that the tea spills out. "I'm doing fine on my own. and I have friends who will look after me if I need it. Those friends of yours are as old as you are. Rose rolls her eyes. What good are they in an emergency? I look at my daughter and don't recognize her. When did she become so cold and calculating? I remember her as a little girl with pigtails, crying when she broke her knees and asking to read one more story before bedtime. I remember a teenager rebelling against everything in the world, but still sincere. When did this change happen? Probably when she met Elton. My son-in-law always seemed too smooth, too perfect, like polished glass. Behind his smile and impeccable manners, I sensed something false. Walter didn't like him either, though he never said so directly. Rose, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not a frail old woman, I said, trying to stay calm. I still drive my own car, do my own shopping, manage my own finances, and I'll keep doing it as long as I can. Of course, Mom. She smiles that patronizing smile of hers again. But at least let us help with some things. With the accounts, for instance. Elton is great with finances. He could. My late husband was a financial analyst and I taught math, I remind him. I think I can handle the electricity bill. Rose looks at her watch and jumps up. Oh, I have to run to a meeting. She kisses me on the cheek. I'll stop by this weekend and we'll continue this conversation. Elton's coming too. He really wants to see you. I nod, not believing a word she says. Something's not right here. Rose has never taken much interest in my health or well-being. When Walter died, she came to the funeral, spent 2 days with me, and went back to her life. Called once a week, came for major holidays. A typical adult daughter-mother relationship, not too close, but not alienated either. And now all of a sudden she's so concerned? And all this talk about moving away, about me getting older, it's like she's trying to convince me that I can't live on my own. As the door closes behind Rose, I look through the mail she did leave behind. An electric bill, an advertisement, a letter from my old friend Dorothy in Oregon. Stop. The envelope is open. I distinctly remember that Dorothy always seals envelopes the special way she folds the corners. This envelope was opened and then sloppily resealed. Rose has been reading my mail. I sit down at the table, feeling my heart pounding. Why would my daughter read my correspondence with Dorothy? We discuss books, the weather, Dorothy's grandchildren, nothing of interest to Rose, unless she was looking for something specific, information about my health, my finances. I remember a month ago when Elton offered to help me with my investments. He talked about some amazing opportunities, about how he could increase my savings. I refused, not because I didn't trust my son-in-law, although admittedly I don't trust him much, but because I was used to managing my money myself. Then there were these strange calls. Rose started calling every day, asking how I was feeling, if I remembered to take my medication, if I remembered what day of the week it was. It was like she was testing my memory, and last week she casually asked me if I wanted to give her power of attorney in case something happened to me. It's not a pretty picture. My daughter and son-in-law are up to something, and it's something to do with my money or my house. I walk over to the window and look outside. Rose's car is still parked outside the house. She's sitting behind the wheel and talking on the phone, gesturing vigorously. It doesn't look like she's in a hurry to get to a business meeting. My phone rings. It's Helen reminding me about bridge. I decide not to say anything to my friends about my suspicions, at least not yet. I need to figure out what's going on first. One thing I know for sure is that whatever Rose and Elton are up to, I'm not going to make it easy for them. I may be old, but I'm not out of my mind. And if they think they can fool me, they're in for a big disappointment. Going to bridge, I remember how little Rose used to sit on my lap, and I taught her how to count, how proud she was of her first A in math, how she cried when she left for college and promised to call every day. What happened to that girl? When did ambition and money become more important to her than family and honesty? Maybe I'm being too hard on her. Maybe she really cares about me. But then, why does she read my mail? Why does she tell everyone that I'm becoming forgetful? Locking the door, I make a decision. I'm going to stay alert. I'll keep a close eye on Rose and Elton. And if they're really up to something, well, they don't know who they're messing with yet. I may be lame, but my mind is sharper than ever. After all, I taught math for almost 40 years. I know how to solve complex problems, and it seems my daughter and son-in-law just became my new challenge. Thursday was surprisingly warm for mid-October. I decided to spend the morning in the garden preparing the rose bushes for winter. It's an activity I've always enjoyed, leisurely, meditative, with tangible results. When my hands are busy with garden shears, my thoughts become clearer, and there was much to ponder. In the 2 weeks since Rose's strange visit, her attention to me had only increased. She called daily, often dropping by unannounced, and every time she found an excuse to mention my age or my health. Are you sleeping well, Mom? Do you remember to take your medicine? Remember where you left your keys? These questions were so insistent that they were starting to get on my nerves. I was just finishing trimming the last bush when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Rose's silver Lexus. Again without warning. I set the shears aside and straightened up, stretching my back. My daughter hopped out of the car, holding a large paper bag. Mom, I brought you lunch from that new organic cafe. Her voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. You must have forgotten to eat while immersed in your roses. I'm perfectly capable of remembering to eat, Rose, I replied, pulling on my gardening gloves. But thank you for your concern. We went into the house. Rose began setting the table without asking permission, commenting on the mess in the kitchen. Mom, you need help around the house. I could hire a cleaning lady to come twice a week. I already have Mrs. Patterson who cleans on Mondays, I reminded her. That's good enough? Rose put some kind of elaborate quinoa and avocado salad on the plates. I preferred a simpler meal, but I decided not to argue. By the way, I ran into your neighbor, Mrs. Burke, Rose said casually. She mentioned that she'd seen how long it took you to open your front door last week. I frowned. The lock sticks sometimes. It had nothing to do with my memory or coordination. Sure, Mom. Rose patted my hand with such condescension that I wanted to shake off her fingers. Listen, I have to take an important call. Can I use your office? Without waiting for my answer, she took the phone and headed into the small room Walter and I used as a home office. I heard the door close. I didn't like eavesdropping. It was against every principle I'd followed all my life, but my intuition told me something was wrong. I walked quietly to the study door and listened. Rose's voice was muffled, but distinct enough. Yes, Elton, I'm at her place now. No, she's in the garden, as usual. Yes, I've noticed she's becoming more and more absent-minded. Yesterday, she couldn't even remember her neighbor's name. That's a lie. Pure lies. I know Mrs. Burke very well. We've been neighbors for 20 years. Dr. Wilkins agrees with us about the early signs of dementia, Rose continued. He thinks she needs constant observation. Yes, I spoke to him last week. No, she hasn't gone to see him herself, of course. You know how stubborn she is. Dr. Wilkins? My family doctor? I saw him a month ago for a routine checkup, and he didn't say a word about dementia. In fact, he complimented my cognitive health. Look, we need to move faster. If we wait for her to completely give up, it could take years, and the bank won't wait. I know it sounds harsh, but we have to take care of her assets while she's still legally capable. Yes, the lawyer has already prepared the paperwork. Of course, everything will look like her own decision. I stepped away from the door, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. I wanted to burst into the office and demand an explanation, but I held back. If I revealed that I'd heard their plans, they'd just be more careful. No, I had to be smarter than that. I went back into the kitchen and rattled the dishes, pretending to clear the table. Rose showed up a minute later, wearing a fake smile. Sorry about that, Mom. Work never ends. She patted my arm again. Listen, Elton and I would like you to come over for dinner on Saturday. Nothing fancy, just a family night out. Sure, honey, I smiled back, hoping my smile looked genuine. I'd love to come. After Rose left, I sat in the living room for a long time, trying to process what I'd heard. My own daughter spreading lies about my health, meeting with my doctor behind my back, and planning to take over my assets. It was too monstrous to believe, and at the same time, too real to ignore. I needed information, and I knew where to get it. My neighbor to my right, Agatha Burke, was known for her love of gossip. If Rose was really spreading rumors about me, Agatha would know about it. I grabbed a freshly baked cookie from the kitchen. Yes, I still baked every Wednesday, contrary to Rose's opinion of my absent-mindedness, and went to visit my neighbor. Agatha, as always, was delighted with the visit and the opportunity to chat. After the usual pleasantries, I gently steered the conversation to the right topic. You know, Agatha, I think people have been looking at me strangely lately, like they're pitying me or worrying me, I said, a little perplexed. Have you noticed anything like that? Agatha hesitated, avoiding my gaze. Well, people are always gossiping about something. Don't pay attention. Agatha, my voice became firmer. We've known each other for 20 years. Please tell me the truth. She sighed, giving up. Your daughter? She spoke to several neighbors, and Pastor Mitchell, and the director of our community center. She said you've been diagnosed with early onset dementia, and she asked everyone to keep an eye on you. Said you sometimes forget where you are and can even get lost. I felt anger rising inside me, but I tried to stay calm. And how many people believed her? Well, she was so convincing. And she mentioned her doctor, some specialist. And then, you know how it is at our age? Agatha hesitated. Not that I believe it, but some people might. Thank you for your honesty, Agatha. I patted her hand. You can trust me. I'm in my right mind. And I intend to stay that way for years to come. As I left Agatha, I realized that the situation was more serious than I thought. Rose and Elton were methodically paving the way for something they planned to do with my assets. But what exactly did they want to do? Sell my house? Take control of my bank accounts? I needed the advice of someone who understood legal matters, and I knew someone who did. Richard Higgins was a law professor at the college where I taught. We worked together for almost 30 years and occasionally played tennis on weekends, until my hips started bothering me enough that I had to have surgery. After retirement, we kept in touch, meeting occasionally for a cup of coffee. I called him and, without going into detail over the phone, asked to meet. Richard, sensing the seriousness of the situation, invited me to his home that same evening. Richard's house was in the old part of Ellendale, a 15-minute drive from mine. I was still driving, despite Rose's hints that it was time for me to get my driver's license. Richard met me at the door. In his 77, he was still trim and energetic, with a thick lock of gray hair and penetrating blue eyes. His wife had died 2 years ago, and since then he had lived alone, but he kept the house in immaculate order. Miriam, he hugged me warmly. It's so good to see you. Come in. I've made your favorite tea. We settled in his cozy office, surrounded by shelves of legal literature. I told him everything, the strange behavior of Rose and Elton, the overheard conversation, the information from Agatha. Richard listened attentively, not interrupting, only occasionally frowning and making notes in his notebook. So, he said when I was done, they make you look incapacitated to gain control of your finances. A classic scheme, unfortunately. I've seen it many times, especially in families with significant assets. But why? I still couldn't believe my daughter would do such a thing. Rose has a good job, Elton earns well. My house and savings aren't that big. You mentioned that your son-in-law is a stockbroker, Richard said thoughtfully. It's a risky profession. Maybe they have financial problems you don't know about. I remembered that 6 months ago, Elton had mentioned some temporary difficulties and asked if I could support them with a small sum. I had declined then, saying that I needed my savings myself to provide for my old age. Elton was annoyed, but quickly pulled himself together. Is their financial situation really that dire? What am I to do, Richard? I asked. I could confront Rose directly, but I'm afraid that would only accelerate their plans. You're right, confrontation isn't the best option right now. Richard nodded. You need to be proactive, but quiet. First, you should visit your doctor and get an official report on your cognitive health. Ask him to also put on record that you haven't given him permission to discuss your health with your daughter. I nodded, jotting down his recommendations in the small notebook I always carried with me. Second, check all your financial records. Make sure nothing has changed without your knowledge. See if you've signed any documents lately without reading them carefully. I always read everything I sign carefully, I assured him. Good. Third, install a video surveillance system in your house. Not to catch them red-handed, although that might come in handy, but to have proof of your day-to-day competence. If the case goes to court, such recordings can be very useful. CCTV? I was surprised. Isn't that a little paranoid? Miriam, your daughter is meeting with your doctor behind your back and spreading lies about your health. There's no need for ceremony. Richard was unusually serious. Try not to be alone with them without witnesses. If they've invited you to dinner, find an excuse to bring someone else. I could ask Helen, I thought. She's been wanting to get to know my daughter for a long time. That's fine. One last thing. Be prepared that they might try to manipulate you emotionally. Rose is your daughter, and naturally you love her and want to believe in the best. They will use that against you. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Despite all the evidence, part of me still hoped that this was some kind of misunderstanding, that Rose couldn't be that calculating and heartless. I know this is hard for you to hear, Richard said softly, noticing my reaction. But it was better to be prepared for the worst and be pleasantly surprised than the other way around. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of determination and sadness. Thank you, Richard. I'll take your advice. He walked me to the door and gave me another hug before he left. You're a strong woman, Miriam. You'll get through this. And remember, I'm always on your side. On the drive home, I thought about our conversation. Richard's plan was sensible but cautious. He suggested gathering evidence and preparing for a possible legal confrontation. But what if Rose and Elton are acting faster than we realize? What if they've already taken some steps? I decided to add a few measures of my own to Richard's plan. Tomorrow I'll visit my bank and check all the accounts. I'll talk to the manager and alert him to possible fraud attempts. Then I'll meet with Dr. Wilkins to see if he's been communicating with Rose without my knowledge. And finally, I'd start keeping a close eye on my mail, checking it earlier than usual so Rose couldn't intercept any important letters. As I pulled into the garage, I noticed that the lights in my house were on, even though I remembered turning them off before I left. My heart twitched. Is someone breaking in? I cautiously entered through the back door and heard sounds in the kitchen. Mom, is that you? Rose's voice. I stopped by to drop off some of that soup you like. Where have you been so late? I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the game I was now to play. A game where the stakes were my possessions, my independence, and perhaps my dignity. Just visiting an old friend, dear, I replied, trying to keep my voice light-hearted. How nice of you to take care of my dinner. I smiled, entering the kitchen where my daughter was rummaging through my cabinets, ostensibly looking for a soup container. In reality, I was sure she was looking for something else entirely. The game was on, and I wasn't about to lose. Friday morning was overcast. The heavy clouds hanging over Ellendale seemed to portend a storm, and not just a meteorological one. I got up earlier than usual, unable to lie down for long because of my troubled thoughts. After my conversation with Richard yesterday, I couldn't wait to take action, to defend myself against my own daughter. The thought was almost physically painful. After breakfast, I decided to check the mail earlier than usual before Rose could accidentally drop by again and intercept my letters. The cool morning air made me wrap myself tighter in my cardigan. My limp felt worse today, a sure sign of the approaching rain. My hips always reacted to the change in weather. Opening the mailbox, I saw several envelopes, an electric bill, an advertising brochure, and a thick official envelope with the First National Bank of Ellendale logo on it. Strange, I didn't have an account with that bank. I'd always used Farmers Cooperative, which had been founded back by Walter's grandfather in 1923. Back in the house, I poured myself a cup of fresh tea and sat down at the kitchen table to go through the mail. I decided to start with the mysterious bank envelope. Inside was a stack of papers. I put on my reading glasses and started looking at the first page. Notice of mortgage loan in the amount of $760,000 secured by real estate located at my address, my house, a loan for $760,000, a loan I knew nothing about. The cup of tea slipped out of my hands and shattered on the tile floor, but I barely noticed it. With trembling fingers, I flipped through the pages, trying to figure out what was going on. According to the documents, a week ago, I had supposedly applied to the bank for a large loan against my house. The money had been transferred to a new account opened in my name at the same bank, and on the last page was my signature. Only it wasn't my signature. Very similar, but not mine. I have a characteristic slant in writing the letter M that I acquired in high school. There was no such slant in this signature. Attached was a copy of a medical report from Dr. Fenton Prentice, whom I had never heard of, stating that I had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, but was still capable of making financial decisions. There was also a copy of a power of attorney supposedly given by me to Rosalind Abbott to manage my financial affairs should my condition worsen. The shock was so intense that I couldn't move. My head was ringing with terror and disbelief. My own daughter, my Rose, the girl I carried under my heart, the girl I taught to read, the girl I bandaged her broken knees with. She stole from me, forged my signature, created a fake doctor, all for money. My first impulse was to grab the phone and call her, to tell her what I thought of her meanness. But then I remembered Richard's warning not to reveal that I knew what they were up to act coolly and methodically. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down and collect my thoughts. $760,000. That's a lot of money. My house was worth about $600,000, but obviously the bank had appraised it higher because of the location and the size of the lot. Why did Rose and Elton need so much money? What were they going to do with the money? I called Richard, trying to keep my voice calm. They did it, I said without preamble. They took out a loan on my house, $760,000, forged my signature, and submitted a false medical report. Richard was silent for a second, digesting the information. Are you sure it was them? Positive. The paperwork lists Rose as my authorized representative. Forged signature, medical report from a doctor who doesn't exist. It's so obvious, it's weird how the bank fell for it. First National? Richard clarified. Yeah, how do you know? Rose worked with them on corporate matters. She probably has connections there that helped her pull off this scam, Richard said quietly. Miriam, this is a felony. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. You need to act fast. I can pick you up in half an hour and we'll go to the bank. Yes, please, I agreed, feeling the shock slowly being replaced by cold determination. While I waited for Richard, I scrutinized all the documents, making notes on inconsistencies and obvious forgeries. According to the dates, the loan had been finalized 8 days ago, just when Rose and Elton were taking special care of me, stopping by on various pretexts and distracting me with endless talk about my health. Richard arrived on time and we went to the First National Bank of Ellendale. On the way, I told him all the details I could glean from the paperwork. We need to find out where the money went, Richard said. If it's still in an account at that bank, we can request that it be frozen. At the bank, we asked to see the manager. We were ushered into an elegant office where we were met by Mr. Barkley, a full, middle-aged man with thinning hair and a nervous look. He visibly tensed when Richard introduced himself as my legal advisor. Mr. Barkley, I began, laying out the documents in front of him. I never applied for a loan from your bank. I never signed these papers. My signature here is forged. The medical report is false, and I demand that this transaction be canceled immediately. The manager turned pale as he looked through the documents. Minus Mrs. Holdsworth, I don't understand. Your daughter has submitted all the necessary documents. She said you couldn't visit the bank in person due to health problems, but you sent her with a notarized power of attorney, which is also forged. I cut her off. I never gave her a power of attorney, and as you can see, my health is fine. I'm perfectly capable of going to the bank in person. Richard intervened, his voice calm but firm. Mr. Barkley, do you realize that your bank has become an accessory to fraud? Issuing a loan without the borrower being present in person, without proper verification of the authenticity of the documents, is a serious breach of banking procedures. But we did a standard check, began to justify the banker. Obviously not thorough enough, Richard interrupted him. Mrs. Holdsworth is going to go to the police to report fraud. The question is, will your bank be cited as an accomplice or as another victim of fraud? This has had an effect. Mr. Barkley became visibly nervous. Of course, we are cooperating fully with the investigation. I will freeze the account immediately and initiate an internal review. Mrs. Holdsworth, let me extend to you my deepest apologies. Apologizing won't bring back the sense of security I lost when I found out my own children tried to steal from me, I said sharply. I want action. I want to know where the money went. Mr. Barkley pressed the intercom button and asked for an account statement. A few minutes later, we were examining the movement of funds. Most of the loan, $500,000, had been transferred to the account of Abbott Investments, a company owned by Elton. The rest of the funds were withdrawn in cash in 4 installments of $50,000, the maximum allowable withdrawal limit. A classic money laundering scheme, Richard commented. Mr. Barkley, I strongly recommend that you freeze all accounts related to Elton and Rosalind Abbott until the investigation is complete. The manager nodded, clearly concerned about the prospect of scandal and possible litigation. As for the cancellation of the loan, Richard continued, we demand an immediate release of the encumbrance on Mrs. Holdsworth's house and a written confirmation that she is not liable for the loan. Yeah, I should consult with our legal department, the banker stammered. Of course, Richard nodded. But be warned, the sooner you resolve this matter, the less likely it is that the bank's reputation will be damaged by the publicity. We left the bank with a written confirmation that my case had been referred to the legal department for urgent review and a promise to contact us within 24 hours. Our next stop was the police station. I had never written a police report before and felt uncomfortable in the cold room with the harsh light of fluorescent bulbs and the smell of coffee and disinfectant. But determination never left me. Detective Lawrence, a serious man in his 40s with an attentive gaze, listened to my story and studied the paperwork. Unfortunately, these cases of financial fraud against the elderly are becoming more and more common, he said. Usually strangers do it, but sometimes, as in your case, their own relatives. We will investigate and contact the bank for more information. What about my daughter and son-in-law? I asked. They need to be held accountable. The detective nodded. We'll bring them in for questioning. If there's enough evidence, they'll be charged with fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Those are serious crimes, Mrs. Holdsworth. They could get real prison sentences. The thought made me wince. Despite everything they'd done, Rose was still my daughter. But then I remembered how they'd cold-bloodedly planned to rip me off, spread lies about my health, forged my signature. No, they deserved to be punished. After the police, Richard suggested we take a civil suit to court. A criminal case can take months, he explained. And we need to protect your assets and regain control of the situation as quickly as possible. The Ellendale County Courthouse was a grand columned building dating back to the early 20th century. Inside, it smelled of wood polish and old books, a smell I had always associated with power and justice. Thanks to Richard's connections, we were able to apply for an emergency injunction that same day and meet with Judge Montgomery, an energetic woman in her 60s, known for her adamancy in matters of fraud. She listened to us carefully, reviewed documents, including a fake medical report and a genuine one from Dr. Wilkins. This is an egregious case, the judge said, taking off her glasses. I will issue a temporary restraining order freezing all of Elton and Rosalind Abbott's assets related to this loan and prohibiting them from doing anything with your property, Mrs. Holdsworth. I will also send a formal order to the bank to remove the encumbrance on your home. We'll set a full hearing for next week. Thank you, Your Honor, I said sincerely. There's one more thing, Richard added. As it turned out, some of the stolen funds had been used to buy the new house the Abbotts had moved into last week. The judge frowned. They bought the house with money obtained by fraud? That is correct, Your Honor, Richard confirmed. In fact, this house was purchased with funds stolen from Mrs. Holdsworth. In that case, Judge Montgomery said firmly, I will issue a preliminary order to evict Elton and Rosalind Abbott from the illegally purchased home. The property will be seized pending the outcome of the proceedings. I felt a chill run down my spine. Everything was happening so fast, so decisively. This morning I had been shocked at the treachery I had discovered, and now I had already gotten a court order to evict my own daughter. As we left the courthouse, the gray sky finally broke into rain. Large drops drummed on the sidewalk, creating small puddles. Richard and I took shelter under an awning, waiting for the downpour to subside a little. Are you okay? He asked, noticing that I was unusually quiet. I looked out at the rain, pondering his question. Was I okay? No, of course not. My heart was broken by the betrayal of the person I loved most in the world. My daughter, my only child, had decided that my money was more important than myself, that my house, my savings, was a fair price to pay for the destruction of our relationship. No, I answered honestly. But I will. I have to be strong. Not for myself, for principle. You can't let people use age as an excuse to steal and cheat, even if those people are your own family. Richard put his hand on my shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Miriam, and you're not alone in this struggle. The bailiff was supposed to deliver the eviction order to Elton and Rose the next day, Saturday. He suggested that I attend, and after some thought, I agreed. I wanted to see their faces when they realized their plan had failed. I wanted to hear what excuses they would come up with. Or maybe I secretly hoped to see genuine remorse, an admission of guilt, an understanding of how deeply they had hurt me. When I got home, I sat in a chair by the window, watching the rain wash over the glass. The drops flowed in sinuous paths, merging and separating, creating patterns that resembled a map of an unknown country, a land of betrayal and disappointment that I never wanted to go to. I thought about Rose, about her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, about how she cried on my shoulder when she got her heart broken in high school, how proud I was of her when she went to law school, when she got her first serious job. When did she turn into someone capable of stealing from her own mother? When did money and status become more important to her than family and integrity? Was it a gradual process or a sudden decision dictated by desperation? The phone rang, snapping me out of my gloomy thoughts. It was Mr. Barkley from the bank. Mrs. Holdsworth, I wanted to inform you that our legal department has decided to cancel the loan agreement completely. We recognize that the loan process was seriously flawed. The foreclosure on your home will be lifted within 24 hours. What about the money? I asked. The money that had already been transferred and withdrawn. We have frozen all accounts related to Elton and Rosalind Abbott at our bank. Unfortunately, the amounts that have already been withdrawn in cash or transferred to other banks, we cannot recover without a court order. But we are willing to cooperate fully with the investigation and provide all the necessary information. After talking to the banker, I felt some relief. At least my house was safe. No one could kick me out of it, sell it, or use it as collateral without my knowledge. But the financial side of the issue was only part of the problem. Money could be recovered, property could be restored. But how do you rebuild trust? How do you heal the wound inflicted by the person closest to you? I knew that tomorrow would be one of the hardest days of my life. I would have to face Rose and Elton to see their reactions to the revelation of their scheme, to hear their excuses, their accusations, maybe even their pleas for forgiveness. Was I ready for that? Would I have the strength to stay firm and not give in to emotional manipulation? Would my heart shake at the look of despair in my daughter's eyes? But I also realized that I couldn't back down, not only for my own sake, but for the sake of all the elderly people who fall victim to such machinations, for the sake of all the parents whose children see them only as a source of inheritance, not as living people with feelings, dreams, and the right to a dignified old age. I rose from my chair, feeling a sudden surge of determination. Tomorrow I will be strong. I will stand up straight despite the pain in my hip. I'll look them in the eye without averting my gaze. And if they ask why I do this to them, I will answer simply, because justice is more important than convenience, principles are more important than comfort, and self-respect is more important than even the closest of family ties. The rain outside the window began to subside, the last drops slowly dripping down the glass. Tomorrow would be a day when I would finally stand up for myself and my future. The day I show Rose and Elton that their plan has failed and that I am not a helpless old woman to be tricked and robbed. I am Miriam Holdsworth, and I will not allow anyone, not even my own daughter, to rob me of my dignity and independence. Saturday morning was unexpectedly clear after yesterday's downpour. The sunlight was streaming through the curtains, creating whimsical patterns on my bedroom floor. On another day, I would have enjoyed this play of light, but today was no ordinary day. Today was a day of reckoning. I dressed with the utmost care. The dark blue dress, the pearl earrings Walter had given me for our 40th wedding anniversary, the neat hair. I wanted to look put together and confident, not the helpless old woman Rose and Elton thought I was. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell rang. Richard stood on the threshold, and next to him stood the bailiff, Mr. Thompson, a distinguished-looking man of about 50 in a formal uniform. "Good morning, Miriam," Richard greeted me. "Are you ready?" I nodded, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. Was I really ready for what was coming? As ready as one can be for something like this, I answered quietly. Mr. Thompson coughed delicately. Mrs. Holdsworth, I must warn you that these situations are often emotionally charged. If at any point you feel you need to leave, just let me know. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, but I have to be there, not just for justice, but for me, to set the record straight. We got into Richard's car. As we drove, I looked at the familiar streets of Ellendale, where I'd lived most of my life. The park where I'd walked with little Rose, the library where I'd taught her to read, the school where I'd walked her to every morning, passed by. Rose and Elton's new home was in the upscale neighborhood of Willow Hills, a part of town lined with luxurious mansions with manicured lawns and high fences. We pulled up to a wrought iron gate, beyond which we could see a two-story colonial-style house with white columns and large windows. Impressive, Richard said dryly. Now I can see where some of the money went. Mr. Thompson pressed the intercom button. After a few beeps, Elton's sleepy voice sounded. Who's there so early? Mr. Abbott. This is the Ellendale County Bailiff. I have an eviction order that needs to be served immediately. Please open the gate. There was a long pause, then the gate slowly opened. We drove down the curving driveway to the front entrance. The door of the house swung open before we even got out of the car. Elton was standing on the doorstep in an expensive silk robe, his usually smoothly combed hair disheveled and his face a mixture of bewilderment and alarm. What was the meaning of this? What eviction? There must be some mistake. His gaze slid from the bailiff to Richard, and then to me. There was a flash of understanding in his eyes, followed by shock. Miriam, what are you doing here? What's going on? I got out of the car slowly, leaning on my cane a little harder than usual. Good morning, Elton. My voice sounded calmer than I expected. I suppose you should get Rose. It concerns both of you. Rose is in the shower, Elton stammered, shifting his gaze nervously from me to the bailiff. Look, I don't understand what this is about. Why don't you explain? Mr. Thompson stepped forward, holding out an official document. Mr. Abbott, this is an eviction order issued by Judge Montgomery on the grounds that this property was purchased with funds obtained by fraud. The court order requires you and Mrs. Abbott to vacate the premises within 3 hours. Elton's face turned so pale that I was afraid he might faint on the doorstep. There's been some misunderstanding. He muttered. We bought this house legally. We have all the documents. The deeds to the money from the fraudulent loan against my house, I interrupted him. A loan that I only found out about yesterday when I got the notice from the bank. At that moment, Rose appeared on the doorstep in a white terry cloth robe, her hair wet and a look of confusion on her face. Elton? Who is it? Why didn't you? She stopped when she saw us. Mom, what's going on? Your mother discovered a $760,000 loan made out in her name without her knowledge, Richard explained. A loan obtained with false documents and a false medical report. The money from that loan was used to purchase this house, making the transaction null and void. Wait. Rose raised her hands in a protective gesture. Mom, let's talk. Just the two of us, no strangers. It's a family matter. We can work it out without lawyers and bailiffs. I'm afraid not, I said firmly. You and Elton turned it from a family matter into a felony when you decided to steal my money. Steal? Rose sounded indignant. We didn't steal anything. We were taking care of you. You're getting forgetful, distracted. We just wanted to make sure your finances were in order while you could still. While I can still what? I interrupted. Sign the papers? Not realize you've cleaned out my accounts? Not realize you're spreading lies about my health? Mr. Thompson coughed delicately. I would suggest we continue this conversation inside rather than on the doorstep. Elton and Rose reluctantly stepped aside, allowing us into the house. The inside was as impressive as the outside. Marble flooring in the foyer, crystal chandelier, antique furniture. Mr. and Mrs. Abbott, I must inform you that according to the warrant, you are not allowed to take anything out of the house except the necessities of life. Clothing, toiletries, medications, the bailiff explained. That's ridiculous, Rose exclaimed. This is our house. We bought it with our own money. With the money from a loan in your mother's name, with a forged signature and a false medical report, Richard reminded her. The bank has already admitted fraud and canceled the loan. The police are investigating. Elton sank into the nearest chair, his face taking on an unhealthy gray hue. Miriam, listen, he began in a hoarse voice. This isn't what it looks like. We've had some temporary financial difficulties. I made some bad investments. The market crashed. We were planning to get it all back. I swear we didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me? I said it again. You spread rumors about my incipient dementia. You told the neighbors I was forgetting my name. You made up a doctor who didn't exist, forged my signature, and none of this was supposed to hurt me? Rose threw Elton a fiery glare. It was all his idea, she blurted out. I didn't want to, but he insisted. He said that if he didn't, we'd lose everything, that his creditors wouldn't wait. Rose, Elton sounded shocked at the betrayal. What creditors? I asked, shifting my gaze from my daughter to my son-in-law. Elton lowered his head, avoiding my gaze. I owed some people, serious people. They threatened me, us. I had to do something. And you decided the best way was to steal from my mother? Rose crossed her arms across her chest, as if distancing herself from her husband. And you happily agreed to it. Elton snapped at her. Don't play the innocent victim, Rose. You were the first to offer to use your mother's house as collateral. You said she wouldn't be able to live on her own anytime soon anyway. I listened to this exchange of accusations with a growing sense of disgust. They couldn't even maintain a united front in their betrayal, instantly turning against each other. How much do you owe, Elton? Richard asked. Elton swallowed nervously. About $450,000. Originally it was less, but the interest? I've been taking money from people who don't care much about the legality of their transactions. Loan sharks? Richard clarified. Dash. Call it what you want. Elton shrugged. I made a few bad bets, then I tried to win back and got in even deeper. By then the banks were already denying me credit, so I turned to alternative sources of financing and decided to pay me back with my money, I said. We were going to pay it back, Rose exclaimed. Elton promised that as soon as he paid off his debts, his business would be profitable again, and we would pay off the mortgage. The mortgage was in my name, I reminded him, dash my house, which I could have lost if your plan had worked. Mr. Thompson coughed again, drawing attention. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to continue with the procedure. You have 3 hours to gather the necessary items. I have to make an inventory of the possessions that will remain in the house. 3 hours? Rose was indignant. But where are we going to go? Where are we going to live? That's not my problem, Mrs. Abbott, replied the bailiff. The law gives you 3 hours to evict. I felt a wave of anger rise in me, not fierce, burning anger, but cold, crystal-clear anger. Family doesn't steal from each other, Rosalind, I said quietly. Family doesn't lie, manipulate, or try to put a roof over each other's heads. You stopped being my family the moment you decided that my possessions were more important than my well-being. Mr. Thompson began making his rounds of the house, taking an inventory of the property. Rose and Elton reluctantly followed him upstairs to begin packing their belongings. I stayed in the living room with Richard, feeling a strange emptiness inside. "You're doing great," he said quietly, sitting down next to me on the couch. "I don't feel great," I admitted. "I feel empty, like something had died inside me." An hour later, they came downstairs with several suitcases and bags. Rose had changed into a strict suit, Elton into jeans and a sweater. Both looked depressed and lost. "Where are you going?" I asked, feeling a pang of regret, despite everything they'd done. "I have a friend who can shelter us for a few days," Elton answered reluctantly. "And then, I don't know, maybe we'll get an apartment." "With what money?" Rose asked sarcastically. "All our accounts are frozen. Your firm is on the verge of bankruptcy. My clients will flee as soon as they hear about this scandal." Mr. Thompson finished his inventory and came over to us. "Mr. and Mrs. Abbott, you can only take the items on this list." He handed them the document. "Everything else stays in the house until the court rules." "What about my jewelry?" Rose was indignant. "My designer dresses, my watch collection? If these items were purchased with fraudulent funds, they are subject to forfeiture," the bailiff explained. "You can apply to the court for the return of personal items purchased prior to the loan." Rose looked as if she were ready to cry. Elton put his hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "It's all because of you." They carried their suitcases out into the street, where a cab summoned by Elton was waiting for them. Before they got into the car, Rose turned to me. "You're going to regret this, Mother," she said with bitterness in her voice. "When you're all alone, with no family, no support, then you'll realize we were only trying to help." "Help yourself at my expense," I said calmly. "That's not helping, Rosalind. It's selfishness, pure and simple." "Come on, Rose," said Elton, who was already in the cab. "There is nothing more for us to do here." Rose hesitated a moment, as if she wanted to say something else, but then she turned and got into the car without looking back. The cab started up, taking my daughter and son-in-law away from the house they had bought with the money they had stolen from me. Mr. Thompson began the process of sealing the house, installed new locks, put official notices on the doors and windows, and took final photos for the report. "The procedure is complete, Mrs. Holdsworth," he said as he approached me. "The house is sealed and under the jurisdiction of the court until the proceedings are completed. Here is a copy of the property inventory and the eviction deed." I took the papers, feeling their weight not so much in my hands as on my heart. "Thank you for your work, Mr. Thompson," I said sincerely. "I realize it's not the most pleasant part of your duties." "I've seen many evictions, Mrs. Holdsworth," he replied gently, "but rarely have I met a man who has maintained such dignity in such a situation. You did the right thing." When the bailiff left, Richard and I stood at the gate of the empty house. The sun was high and the day was in full swing, but I felt strangely tired, as if I'd lived a lifetime, not just a few hours. "Let's go home," Richard suggested. "You should get some rest." "Yes," I nodded. Home. News in small towns spread faster than a forest fire in the dry season. By Monday, it seemed all of Ellendale knew that Miriam Holdsworth had evicted her own daughter and son-in-law from their new home after they'd tried to swindle her out of $760,000. Of course, with each retelling, the story grew with new details, not always true. I noticed the changes almost immediately. At the Johnson and Sons supermarket where I had shopped every Monday for the past 20 years, the cashier, Debbie, usually chatty and friendly, gave me a dry nod, avoiding eye contact. But the manager, Mr. Johnson, came over in person to help carry the bags to the car and expressed his admiration for my courage in a low voice. "My Aunt Judy went through something similar," he said, carefully placing the bags in the back seat. "Her son tried to sell her house right out from under her nose. Unfortunately, She never decided to sue him. She regretted it for the rest of her life. At the drugstore, I ran into Mrs. Parker, the mother of Rose's high school friend. She always said hello to me, but today she defiantly turned her back and walked across the aisle, as if I were carrying a dangerous infection. But the elderly pharmacist, Mr. Lee, gave me an extra discount and whispered, "Hang in there, Mrs. Holdsworth. You did the right thing." By Wednesday, it was obvious that Ellendale was divided into two camps, those who supported me and those who thought I had acted callously in putting my own daughter out on the street. Surprisingly, the second camp was quite numerous, despite the fact that Rose and Elton had committed a felony. "How can you evict your own child?" I heard as I passed a group of women outside the church. Whatever the circumstances, blood is not water after all. "They say she's really getting dementia," another woman added, not even trying to lower her voice. "Maybe she just doesn't remember authorizing this loan." I quickened my step, trying not to show how hurt I was by those words. Richard had warned me that this would happen. Not everyone would understand my actions. Many would side with the poor young family who were homeless. But it's one thing to know this in theory, and quite another to face judgment face to face. There was a surprise waiting for me at home. There were 3 messages flashing on my answering machine. The first was from Pastor Mitchell, inviting me to tea to discuss recent events and possible reconciliation with my daughter. The second was from Elizabeth Doyle, an old acquaintance with whom we hadn't spoken in years. She said she'd met Rose at the supermarket, and she looked absolutely mortified. The third message was from Rose herself, short, discreet. "Mom, we need to talk. Please call me back." I didn't call back. The memory of Rose's angry face, of her words, "You're going to regret this," was still too fresh. What could she say to me now? What new manipulations had she thought up? On Thursday, a call came from Helen. "Miriam, darling, you won't believe who came to see me today." Her usually calm voice sounded excited. "Your Rose." She was in tears, with red eyes. Said you two had quarreled over some misunderstanding, and now she didn't know how to make things right. She asked me to talk to you, to persuade you to give her a chance to explain. "And what did you say to her?" I asked, inwardly tense. "That I don't interfere in family matters," Helen snorted, "and that if she wanted to make up with you, she should start by admitting her guilt, not by trying to manipulate you through your friends." She didn't sound very happy with that answer. I smiled gratefully, though Helen couldn't see it. "Thank you for the warning. I suppose Rose won't be limited to just you. Of course not. She'll be visiting everyone you know today. Be prepared for a lot of phone calls about reconciliation." Helen was right. By late afternoon, I had 3 more calls. My former colleague Martha, my neighbor Agatha, and even my hairdresser Tony. All of them, in one way or another, tried to find out what had happened between Rose and me, and implied that, for the sake of the family, it was worth forgiving any mistakes. I could feel the heaviness growing inside. Did I look like a heartless old woman who refused to forgive her only daughter? Did no one realize the seriousness of what Rose and Elton had done? Friday morning, when I went out to get the mail, Agatha came up to me. "Miriam, darling, I just have to tell you," she began without preamble. Dash. "I saw Rose at the Green Cafe yesterday. She looks awful, a shadow of her old self. She and Elton rent a tiny apartment on the other side of town, and she has to take extra cases to pay for it. I realize what they did was wrong, but they've been punished enough already, don't you think?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Agatha, do you know that they tried to steal $760,000 from me? That they spread lies about my health, telling everyone, including you, that I had dementia, that they forged my signature on documents? That's not just wrongdoing, that's a felony." Agatha blushed and looked away. Yes, of course, but they're your family, Miriam. And Rose looks so remorseful. She says it was all Elton's idea, and she was just trying to save her marriage. You know how girls sometimes follow their husbands blindly. Rose is 45 years old, Agatha, I said sharply. She's not a girl. She's a grown woman, a lawyer with 20 years' experience, and she knew exactly what she was doing. Agatha shook her head, her face a mixture of sympathy and incomprehension. You know what they say in town? That you never really loved your daughter. That you were always too hard on her, too demanding. That you chose your career over motherhood, and now you're taking revenge for your own mistakes. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I loved Rose more than anything in the world. Yes, I was a demanding mother, but only because I wanted what was best for her. I never put my career before my family. On the contrary, I often sacrificed professional opportunities to be there for my daughter. Who says that? I asked, feeling my voice shake. Everyone, Agatha shrugged. People sympathize with Rose. She talks so convincingly about how you've always been cold to her, how you've never supported her, how even at her wedding you criticized her choices. I didn't listen any further. I turned around and walked back into the house, barely holding back my tears. So that's the game Rose is playing now, imagining herself as the victim of a cold, heartless mother. And people believe her, just as they believe the story about my incipient dementia. I spent the whole day at home, not answering the calls, of which there were more and more. My thoughts were confused. Maybe there was some truth to what Agatha had said. Maybe I'd made a mistake in raising Rose, if she'd grown up to be a person capable of such betrayal. Maybe I should confront her, hear her explanation. Richard called this evening. Miriam, I heard what's going on in town, he said without preamble. Don't let them influence you. Rose and Elton are trying to rewrite history, to make themselves look like victims. It's a classic manipulative tactic. I know, Richard, but it's so hard, hearing people who've known me all my life repeat these lies. Doubting myself, doubting my decisions, that's exactly what they want, Richard said firmly. They want you to doubt yourself, to feel guilty, and then agree to a reconciliation on their terms. Maybe even withdraw your statement from the police. I would never. You say that now, but the pressure's gonna build. That's why I'm calling to offer you something. There's a support group tomorrow at the community center for seniors facing financial abuse from relatives. I think you should go. A support group? I was surprised. That sounds, I don't know, Richard. I don't feel very comfortable telling strangers about my problems. Just come and listen, he suggested gently. I think you'll find it helpful to know that you're not alone in your situation, and that there are people who really understand what you're going through. After some hesitation, I agreed. What did I have to lose, after all? Things couldn't get any worse. Saturday morning, I went to the Ellendale Community Center, a spacious red brick building dating back to the 60s. Inside, in a small conference room, about 10 people were already gathered, mostly my age or slightly older. Richard was waiting at the entrance and escorted me to a vacant chair. The group was led by Eleanor Prescott, an energetic woman of about 65, with short silver hair and shrewd brown eyes. Welcome, Miriam. She shook my hand warmly. Richard told me about your situation. You are a very brave woman. I smiled uncertainly, not feeling particularly brave. The meeting began with Eleanor telling her story, how her nephew, whom she had raised as her own son, had convinced her to sign a power of attorney, ostensibly to manage her investments, and then used that power of attorney to sell her house and transfer the money into his own account. By the time I discovered it, it was too late, she said. The money was spent, the house was sold. I sued, but the process took years. In the end, I received only a small compensation. But the worst part was the reaction of the people around me. Many thought it was my own fault, too gullible, too naive. Others said I should forgive my nephew because family is family. Only a few really supported me. After Eleanor, other members of the group spoke. Beverly, a 78-year-old widow, described how her son and daughter-in-law convinced her to sell her house and move in with them, promising care and attention, and then effectively turned her into a housekeeper and babysitter for her children, while completely controlling her finances. Thomas, an elegant gentleman in his 80s, tearfully recounted how his daughter systematically withdrew money from his accounts, taking advantage of his poor eyesight and inability to check bank statements. Story after story, all so different and yet so similar to mine. Financial abuse, manipulation, isolation, gaslighting, and always the same excuse: we were doing it for your own good. When it was my turn, I suddenly told everything from Rose's first strange visits to her and Elton's eviction from the illegally purchased house. I told her about the feelings of betrayal, the pain, the doubts that had begun to gnaw at me in recent days. I keep asking myself, maybe I was a bad mother. Maybe I deserved to be treated this way, I confessed, feeling tears coming to my throat. There is no excuse for financial abuse, Eleanor said firmly. No matter what kind of mother you were, no one has the right to steal your money, forge your signature, lie about your health. It's a crime, period. But public opinion? To hell with public opinion, Beverly said suddenly, and everyone laughed. Pardon the expression, but seriously, most of these people have never been in your situation. They see a young woman in tears and automatically take her side. It's called ageism, prejudice against older people. They think we've outlived our time, that our money and possessions aren't really ours anymore, but rather family resources that the young have a right to manage. Exactly. Thomas supported her. My daughter used to say, "Daddy, you're going to die soon anyway. Why do you need so much money? You'd better help us now," as if my desire for a decent old age was something unseemly. Rose said something like that, I remembered, that I should help them because they were young and needed it more, that my house was too big for me alone. Classic manipulation? Eleanor nodded. They try to make us feel guilty because we want to keep control of our own lives and possessions. Don't fall for it, Miriam. You have every right to protect what is yours, and no family ties obligate you to be a victim of fraud. After the formal part of the meeting, we all stayed for tea and informal socializing. I met Dorothy, a 72-year-old former teacher whose story was particularly close to mine. My son had also taken out a loan on my house, she told me. When I discovered this and went to the police, all our mutual friends turned against me. They said I was crazy, that I was exaggerating, that I should forgive and forget. It was so hard that I almost gave up and withdrew my statement. "What stopped you?" I asked. "My lawyer." He said, "Dorothy, if a stranger stole money from you, would you forgive him and forget? Why should you forgive a man who not only stole from you, but also betrayed your trust?" That got me thinking, and I decided to go all the way. My son got a suspended sentence and a commitment to pay me restitution. We've been estranged for 5 years, and you know what? I have no regrets. My life is better without a man who only saw me as a source of money. Her words made me wonder, did I really want to rebuild my relationship with Rose after everything that had happened? Could I ever trust her again? And most importantly, had she changed? Had she realized the seriousness of what she'd done? Or was she just looking for new ways to manipulate me? I returned home with a light heart and a clear head. Talking to people who had been through similar experiences gave me something that neither Richard nor my old friends could give me: the realization that I was not alone, that my feelings were normal, that my actions were justified. On Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood Pastor Mitchell, a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples. Miriam, I'm sorry to intrude, but I had to speak to you personally, he began. Rose came to see me. She's desperate. She says she's made a terrible mistake and doesn't know how to make things right. She asked me to mediate your reconciliation. I gestured for him to come in and offered him tea. While the kettle was boiling, I listened attentively to the pastor. He talked about forgiveness, about mercy, about the importance of family bonds, about Rose's remorse and her willingness to accept any conditions for reconciliation. She said, "You were right about everything," the pastor continued, that she allowed Elton to involve herself in this scam, that she realizes the seriousness of her act and is ready to atone for it. All she asks is that you withdraw your statement from the police. She says that a criminal record will ruin her career, that she will never recover from such a blow. I silently poured the tea into cups, thinking about what he'd said, so Rose wasn't worried about our broken trust or the pain she'd caused me, but about the possible criminal record and its effect on her career. Pastor, I finally said, if your church was robbed and you knew exactly who did it, would you withdraw the police report out of mercy? He hesitated. That? This is a different situation, Miriam. We're talking about your daughter here, about blood ties, wine, which didn't stop her from trying to take my home away from me. You know, I went to a meeting yesterday of a support group for elderly people who've been financially abused by relatives. And you know what I learned there? That forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. That love doesn't have to make us defenseless against manipulation. That sometimes the most merciful act is to allow a person to face the consequences of their actions so that they can truly change. Pastor Mitchell listened intently without interrupting. I'm not retracting the statement, I said firmly. This isn't revenge, it's justice. If Rose is truly remorseful, let him prove it to the court, not to me. Let him admit his guilt, return the money he and Elton stole. Let him publicly deny the lies they've been spreading about my health. And then maybe we can start to rebuild our relationship. But not before. The pastor finished his tea and stood up. I respect your decision, Miriam, he said, and I'll pass it on to Rose. You know, I came here thinking I'd persuade you to forgive your daughter, but now I see that you are wiser than I thought. Perhaps your firmness is what Rose needs most right now. When he left, I sat in the parlor for a long time, thinking about our conversation. For the first time in days, I felt completely confident in my decision. Confidence that had been given to me not only by Richard's legal arguments, but also by the emotional support of my new friends in the group. I no longer doubted myself, didn't blame myself for what had happened. I didn't feel I had to sacrifice fairness to maintain the appearance of a family relationship. I was prepared for the long road ahead, the lawsuits, the public condemnation, the loneliness. But I also knew that I now had support, not only from old friends who had always been there for me, but new ones who understood me in a way no one else could. On Monday, I called Eleanor and asked if I could become a regular member of their support group. She enthusiastically agreed, adding, "You know, Miriam, your story is inspiring. Most of us discovered the fraud too late, when the money had already been spent. But you were able to stop it in time, to protect yourself. Many people would benefit from hearing how you did it." I smiled, feeling real pride in my actions for the first time in a long time. Yes, I had lost my daughter, or rather, I had finally seen what she had become. But I had retained my dignity, my independence, and my ability to distinguish between true love and the manipulation that cloaked that word. And perhaps because of my experience, someone else will be able to protect themselves, to not let fear of judgment or false guilt make them fall victim to financial abuse. If so, then everything I went through made sense. Spring in Ellendale has always been special. Every year I looked forward to seeing the lilacs in my garden begin to bloom, filling the air with their sweet fragrance. This year's blooms came early as mid-April. Heavy purple bunches hung from the bushes Walter had planted more than 30 years ago. 6 months had passed since that October day when I discovered the loan in my name. 6 months of intense litigation, depositions, meetings with lawyers. 6 months of whispers behind my back, judgmental glances, unsolicited advice, but also 6 months of new discoveries, new friends, a new sense of my own power. I stood at the window, breathing in the scent of lilacs and thinking about the day ahead. Today was to be the final court hearing in my case. The court would finally make a final ruling, and this chapter of my life would be closed, one way or another. Richard promised to pick me up at 10 in the morning. I put on the dark blue suit I'd bought especially for court hearings, neatly styled my hair, and tinted my lips. I wanted to look collected and confident, not the defenseless old woman that Rose and Elton's lawyers were trying to make me look. The doorbell rang at 10 sharp. Richard was always punctual. But when I opened the door, it wasn't just his tall figure standing on the threshold. "I hope you don't mind a support group." Richard smiled, stepping to the side so I could see the people crowded behind him. Eleanor, Beverly, Thomas, Dorothy. Almost all members of our support group for elderly people facing financial abuse from relatives. In addition to them were my old friends Helen, Prudence, Vivian, with whom we played bridge every week. "We thought you could use some moral support," Eleanor explained, hugging me. "No one should be alone on a day like this." I felt a lump come up in my throat. 6 months ago, I would have said no, said I could do it on my own. But now I knew the value of support and friendship. "Thank you," I said simply. "It means a lot to me." We piled into 3 cars, a caravan of solidarity, and headed for the courthouse. On the way, Richard told me that in recent weeks, new evidence of Rose's and Elton's guilt had come to light, which greatly strengthened our position. "Elton's former colleague has agreed to testify that Elton planned the scheme months before it was executed," Richard explained. "He even has emails where Elton discusses the possibility of using your house as collateral without your knowledge. This completely destroys the defense's version of a spontaneous decision made in a moment of financial desperation." The courthouse looked imposing and solemn. I walked up its wide steps, surrounded by my friends, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and determination. Inside, my lawyer, Mr. Green, a young but very competent lawyer whom Richard had recommended, was waiting for us. "Mrs. Holdsworth, we have a very strong case," he assured me. "I expect the court to grant our demands in full." We entered the courtroom, and I saw Rose at once. She was sitting alone without Elton, looking pale and gaunt. Her usually impeccable appearance had given way to carelessness, her hair in a simple bun, minimal makeup, a simple gray suit instead of the usual designer outfits. She looked up, met my gaze, but immediately looked away. "Where's Elton?" I asked Richard quietly. "Hadn't you heard?" he wondered. "He left town about a month ago. Rumor had it he'd run away from creditors who'd gotten too pushy, left Rose to deal with the mess on her own." This news shouldn't have surprised me. I'd always thought of Elton as a man who thought of himself first. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt a pang of pity for Rose. To be betrayed by her own husband after having betrayed her mother. It seemed almost poetic justice, but still too cruel. The trial began. Judge Henderson, an older man with a shrewd eye and a reputation as a fair but strict officer of the law, listened carefully to both sides. Mr. Green presented new evidence, including the testimony of Elton's colleague and a graphologist's report confirming that my signature on the documents had been forged. Rose's attorney, a young woman with an aggressive manner of speech, tried to portray her client as a victim of circumstance and manipulation by Elton. She spoke of Rose acting under duress, fearing for her safety, that she herself had been the victim of deception. Your Honor, she concluded, Mrs. Abbott has already suffered serious punishment. Her husband has left her with huge debts. Her professional reputation is ruined. She has lost her home and most of her possessions. Further prosecution would do more harm than good, especially given the family ties between the parties. Judge Henderson listened to all the arguments, then recessed for a decision. My friends and I went out into the hallway, where Eleanor offered everyone coffee from the machine. Nas, whatever the judge decides, you've already won, Miriam, she said, handing me a plastic cup. You didn't let them take your home. You protected yourself. You didn't give in to manipulation. A lot of people wouldn't have found that kind of strength. I nodded, grateful for those words. Indeed, regardless of the formal judgment, I had already won the most important victory of all over my doubts, over my fear of judgment, over the guilt Rose had tried to instill in me. As we walked back to the hall, Rose suddenly blocked my way. Mom, she said quietly, we need to talk, alone. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, to maybe finally see genuine remorse in her eyes. The other part feared more manipulation. Here and now, Rosalind, I answered firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of my friends. She pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy with my answer, but continued, I wanted to apologize. What we did to Elton, it was wrong. I realize that now, and I want to make things right, to repair our relationship. After all, we are family and— What exactly are you suggesting? I interrupted her. Rose hesitated, then took a deep breath. I'm offering a compromise. You withdraw the criminal complaint, and I admit in a civil suit that I acted wrongfully. I agree to pay you compensation, albeit in small amounts, but on a regular basis. And in return, you could let me stay with you temporarily until I get back on my feet. After Elton left, I was left with almost no money. I had to sell almost everything to pay off his debts. That's it. No remorse, no desire to rebuild the relationship, just looking for a new place to live and financial support. I felt the last vestiges of hope for reconciliation dissolving. No, Rosalind, I said calmly. I won't withdraw the application, and you won't live in my house. You're not sorry for what you've done. You're just looking for a new way to use me, and I won't allow it anymore. But, Mom, there was a pleading note in her voice. Where do I go? What am I supposed to do? You don't want your only daughter to end up on the streets, do you? You have a profession, Rosalind, I reminded her. You're an intelligent, educated woman. You'll find a way, but not without my help and not at my expense. Before she could answer, we were ushered back into the courtroom. Judge Henderson had already taken his seat and was ready to pronounce judgment. After considering all the evidence presented, he began, the court comes to the following conclusions. First, the acts of the defendants, Rosalind and Elton Abbott, are clearly fraudulent and wrongful. Forging signatures, providing false medical reports, and disseminating defamatory information about the plaintiff's health all constitute serious violations of the law. He paused, flipping through the documents. Second, the court orders that all assets acquired with the proceeds of the illegally obtained loan be forfeited in favor of the plaintiff. This includes a home in the Willow Hills neighborhood, a Lexus automobile, and personal luxury items acquired after the loan was obtained. I saw Rose flinch. Apparently, she was hoping that at least some of the property would remain hers. Thirdly, the court obliges the defendants to pay the plaintiff compensation for moral damages in the amount of $50,000. Given the financial situation of the defendant Rosalind Abbott, the court sets a payment schedule for a period of 5 years. Judge Henderson removed his glasses and looked directly at Rose. The court is also sending the case file to the prosecutor's office to consider filing a criminal complaint for fraud and forgery. Given the severity of the offense and the presence of intent, the court recommends that the possibility of actual imprisonment be considered. I heard Rose draw in air sharply. Her attorney immediately filed a motion for leniency, but the judge was adamant. This decision is final and not subject to appeal, he concluded, banging his gavel. We left the courtroom in high spirits. My friends congratulated me. Richard hugged me tightly, whispering, I always knew justice would prevail. I felt strangely light, as if a heavy weight had finally fallen off my shoulders. Not joy, there was too much pain in the whole story to rejoice, but relief and a sense of closure. As we left the courthouse, I noticed Rose standing alone by the column. She looked lost, almost pathetic. For a moment, the maternal instinct moved in me to approach her, to comfort her, to offer help. But then I remembered her recent offer of reconciliation, which was really just another attempt to use me. No, that chapter of my life was truly closed. I walked past without looking in her direction, and she didn't call out to me. A month later, I was sitting in the office of the notary, Mr. Clark, an elderly gentleman who had handled my legal affairs since Walter's time. Are you sure about your decision, Miriam? He asked, looking at me over his glasses. Absolutely, I nodded. I want to rewrite my will. My entire estate is to be donated to an educational fund for talented students from low-income families. The fund will be named after Walter Holdsworth and governed by a board of trustees, including Richard Higgins, Eleanor Prescott, and you, if you agree. Mr. Clark nodded slowly. That's an honorable decision. But what about your daughter? The law guarantees her a certain share of the inheritance, even if you explicitly exclude her from the will. I know. I pulled an envelope out of my purse. That's why I'm leaving her this amount, the minimum required by law, not 1 cent more. And I want the will to make it clear that this is a conscious decision, not the result of forgetfulness or ignorance. Mr. Clark took the envelope and made a notation in the papers. To be done. What about the house in Willow Hills and other assets obtained by judgment? The house will be sold, and the proceeds from the sale will also go into the fund. Rose and Elton's personal effects can be returned to them if they wish. The rest should be sold as well. We discussed the details at length, and finally I signed the new will. When all the formalities were completed, Mr. Clark accompanied me to the door. You know, Miriam, he said thoughtfully, I've always admired your fortitude, but the way you've handled this situation is particularly admirable. Not everyone could have been so determined and principled. I smiled, grateful for those words. It was a beautiful May day outside. I decided not to call a cab, but to walk. My hip had been bothering me less lately, perhaps because of the new exercises Dorothy had shown me. On the way, I stopped at Martha's Cafe, where the members of our cheerleading squad often gathered after official meetings. To my surprise, Eleanor and Thomas were there, passionately discussing a book. Miriam, Eleanor said excitedly, come join us. We were just talking about a new initiative, educational seminars for the elderly about financial security. Your experience would be very valuable. I sat down at their table, feeling a pleasant warmth at the thought that my knowledge and experience could help someone. It would be my pleasure, I said. By the way, I just came from the notary. I rewrote my will. I decided to leave all the money to an educational fund for talented students. That's a wonderful idea, Thomas approved. The best way to ensure that your legacy lives on. What about Rose? Eleanor asked cautiously. She'll get the minimum allowed by law. I shrugged. I can't say I'm happy about the decision, but it seems fair. Rose had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. We sat in the cafe for a long time, discussing plans for the future. Eleanor talked about her upcoming trip to Europe, Thomas about his new hobby, watercolor painting. I shared my thoughts about resuming math tutoring, not full time, of course, but perhaps one on one tutoring with a few gifted students. When I finally returned home, the sun was already slipping toward sunset, coloring the sky with delicate pinks and golds. I walked out into the garden where the lilacs were in full bloom, giving way to early roses. The garden had always been a place of peace and reflection for me, and tonight was no exception. I thought about the past months, the pain of betrayal, the bitterness of disappointment, the weight of litigation, but also about the new friendships I'd made, the strength I'd found, the dignity I'd managed to maintain. Rose had made her choice, choosing money over relationships, material possessions over trust and love. I couldn't change her decision. I couldn't turn back time, but I could choose how to live my life, and I chose a life filled with meaning, friendship, and new possibilities. At 73, I finally felt truly free from manipulation, from toxic relationships, from feeling guilty about other people's decisions. There are many more years ahead, and I intend to live them fully, with my head held proudly high, surrounded by people who respect me and my boundaries. The sun had disappeared over the horizon, but the sky still held its glow. I breathed in the warm spring air and smiled at my thoughts. The future didn't scare me anymore. On the contrary, I looked at it with optimism and hope. I knew I was stronger than I thought, wiser than I thought, and more deserving of happiness than I'd ever allowed myself to be.